right, welcome to the Dixiecryptid channel. My name is Cameron Buckner, and all we do is tell stories. I have 4 really good Bigfoot encounter stories in this podcast, and at the end, I'm going to do about a 20-minute chapter out of a brand new audiobook that was just released a few days ago that I was fortunate enough to be hired to record. The name of the book is Codename Wild Hunt. It's book 1 of a 3-book series. Hope you guys enjoy it. All right, here we go. Here's an email I've got from a man in Louisiana. This is really good. He's had a lot of really cool experiences through his life. He's finally come down to a point where he can actually study this Bigfoot phenomenon, and this story is fascinating. Here's what he writes. I'm not going to say that this will be one of the best emails you ever get, but to me it's really special. I grew up in the middle of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so I don't have stories of life on the farm other than the 200-acre farm my grandfather had. That's where my dad taught me to hunt. That being said, my life was never normal. It was filled with unusual events like lightning streaking through my house during the summer thunderstorms. To a small boy, the bluish streaks flashing through the house were the greatest thing in the world. We had a tall TV antenna wired to a massive sycamore tree for support, and I believe it acted like a lightning conductor. It never hurt us or damaged the house, but it made Mom jump and scream every time it flashed. That's probably why I love lightning storms, not because of Mom jumping and screaming, but knowing it probably wouldn't hurt me. I chased lightning with a camera for about 4 years, and I got some amazing photos. I grew up in the deep South with all the legends of monsters in the woods, ghosts everywhere, and things that go bump in the night. It's taken 71 years of living to prove that most of them are real. I've hunted and fished the woods and waters of Louisiana all my life, beginning with trips to fishing spots that were just a little wider than the 14-foot boat my dad and I were in. Well, that's where the fish are. We went to exotic places like Cocodrie, I think that's how you pronounce that, Cocodrie, Grassy Lake, False River, and Bayou Pigeon. These waters were filled with alligators, an alligator gar that could easily eat you, and alligator snapping turtles that could take a hand off in one bite. I guess it's best to avoid anything with alligator in its name. These waters were mostly surrounded by deep woods, dark places that would inspire your mind to wander and wonder what was out there, even though you didn't really want to know. I took comfort knowing that our 18-horsepower Evinrude outboard motor could outrun anything that could swim up to our boat. The time spent with my dad was and is the best memories of growing up. He was the guy that knew everything about everything, or so I thought. Hunting trips were pretty much the same. We'd get up 3 hours before sunrise and drive 60 miles to the middle of nowhere to be in the woods before the sun came up. That meant walking in the dark to our hunting spots. And if I had known what was out there, I'd probably have never started hunting. But I was reassured by my father that the guns we had were all we needed to protect ourselves. His was a 12-gauge L.C. Smith double-barrel shotgun, and mine was a .410 bolt-action, both loaded with number 6 squirrel shot. And again, if I had only known. My journey into the unseen realm started when I was young. I had ongoing repetitive nightmares of going to an old 2-story house that was haunted. Each level in the house was more frightening and dangerous than the last, and in my dream, if I ever had made it to the attic, I knew I would die. I never did get to the attic in my dream. Luckily, I always woke up first. 40 years later, I visited that house, the Myrtles near St. Francisville, Louisiana. The ghosts were real, and the dream stopped. I suppose I had met face to face with my fears. Dealing with earthbound souls or ghosts became a way of life for me in the 1970s. Most of them are lost and confused, and they just need a little help finding a direction. But some are evil and demonic, and although I didn't like it, I had to deal with some of those too. Knowing about UFOs was commonplace among all my friends. It was a huge topic of conversation in the 1960s. The U.S. was engaged in the space race, and everyone was interested in all the things about space. UFOs, like Bigfoot, were mostly whispered about for fear of ridicule. In 2006, while living on a farm in Tylertown, Mississippi, I was photographing a thunderstorm, and I managed to get 2 clear photographs of a UFO. There again, proof for what I believed. And I sent the photos to MUFON and never heard back from them. As for Bigfoot, that story started when I was 16. The Roger Patterson Bigfoot film from California had just come out, and I knew it was real. I wanted to go there, but I knew it was impossible. Not too much later, the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek came out, and I thought it was just another B-grade scary movie, and I didn't pay any attention. Shortly after that, my first exposure to Bigfoot came at a hunting camp in Morganza, Louisiana. It was a 23,000-acre lease with 250 members in the hunting club. The club had 3 camps. Days at the camp included getting up 2 hours before dawn to be on an assigned stand as the sun came up, and the drivers would turn the dogs loose to get the deer up and moving. Well, that lasted until noon, after which we returned to camp after the hunt to clean whatever deer were killed. We hung out around the camp for the afternoon, drinking beer and waiting for supper to be cooked. Later, after supper, there was more beer and the nightly card game. Well, myself and another 16-year-old, nicknamed Poncho, had other plans. Because it was a moonlit night, we walked down a 5-mile gravel road at night to another camp with no flashlights, no guns, nothing but my hunting knife for protection, because there had never been a sighting of a bear or cougar. The worst thing that we could meet was a deer, a possum, an armadillo, or a skunk, right? About a mile into the walk, we could hear something walking beside us in the bushes just off the road. It sounded loud enough to be a person, and it seemed to walk on 2 feet. If we stopped, it stopped, and if we walked, it walked. This went on for a quarter of a mile with both of us trying to figure out what it was. We ran through all the animals that we could think of. Nope, no way it was anything that we'd heard or seen before. So what was it? Was it a person? If it was one of the men from our camp, they would have jumped out to scare us. A lost hunting dog, maybe, would have come to us. Deer don't follow people. I stopped and cut a tall sapling to make a spear, and Poncho asked why I did that. I told him if anything comes out of those bushes, I'm going to stab it. It finally faded off in the distance, and we never knew what it was. 2 weeks later, I heard on the radio that on a recent night, a towboat pilot had shined his searchlight on a large upright walking animal on the banks of the Mississippi River near where our camp was. He said it was a Bigfoot. By the time I was 20 and had a job that could have paid my way to California, I was in love and getting married. So much for Bigfoot. I kept up with the stories of Bigfoot as best as I could, and now that I'm single again and retired, in October of 2018, I finally made it to California. While walking a Boy Scout tree trail in Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park, I found a 16-inch Bigfoot track. I hoped I would find the Bigfoot there. I did find a big footprint, but not the Bigfoot. I was like a kid in a candy store. I was all but dancing as I looked for what made the print, but I never saw it. I could feel eyes on me, though. Something was watching me. And I'd call out to it, "Come see me. I'm not afraid of you, and I won't hurt you, and I won't run away. Come in and see me." Nothing appeared or called back, but I knew they were there. But what I didn't know was that this trail is only 20 miles from where Roger Patterson shot his film of Patty. Had I known, I might still be there today. Obligations brought me back to Louisiana, and now I have embarked on a quest for Bigfoot near where I grew up. I headed for the area with the most reported sightings of Bigfoot in Louisiana. It's the Kisatchie National Forest. It is 600,000 acres of commercial pine timberland and hardwood bottoms, and there's lots of room for Bigfoot to roam. I made it here in April of 2019, and I've been in this area off and on since. I camp here 2 to 3 weeks out of every month, as close as a half a mile from where I've found their tracks. I have found numerous tracks and tree structures supposedly built by Bigfoot, and had the extreme pleasure of actually getting a 3-second full body view of one only 100 yards away. On September 5th of 2019, I was walking one of the logging roads here, a stretch that I hadn't walked before. It was 8:30 a.m., and I had stopped to look for tracks around a small pond. I had my Sony digital camera out, and I zoomed out to 1200 millimeters looking around the edges of the pond. Not seeing any tracks of deer, coyotes, or Bigfoot, or raccoons, I turned the camera off and let it hang on a strap connected to my backpack. Well, as I did, I saw something move from the corner of my right eye. And when I turned to see what it was, I saw about 3 seconds of the 7-foot-tall creature walk across the road 100 yards away from me. It takes 5 seconds for that camera to come to life and be ready to take a photo, so I didn't get a photo. I think it had been paralleling me as I walked, and when I stopped, it saw a chance to get ahead of me and it crossed the road. It was covered in 6-inch long black hair and was slender built, unlike the reports of the massive Hulk-like creatures. It had an easy gait, apparently in no particular hurry. Its head was down a little and I couldn't see a neck. The back of its head was conical in shape with a point straight above its head as it looked down. Its hands reached almost to its knees and its palms faced towards the rear. It never looked my way, either because it didn't see me standing there or it didn't want me to see it in the first place, or maybe it did. I've wondered if it wanted me to see it briefly because I had been looking for it and talking to them out loud as I walked, calling for them to come out to visit me, the same way I did in California. I do that a lot here, and I've heard mumbled replies, and I've even been whistled at by one while walking. Whatever the case, I went to try to find it, but I couldn't find any tracks because the ground was dry and hard as concrete. Most of the accounts from eyewitnesses say that they just wanted to get as far away as possible. On the other hand, I wanted to get closer. Remember, I'm the guy that chased lightning. I've heard the tree knocks people talk about and vocalizations in answer to calls one of my fellow researchers made. My goal currently is to get another sighting and hopefully some photos. I've waited 55 years to get to this point. I guess a couple more years won't matter. And that's the end of its email. Oh man, this guy, he's 71 years. I don't know how old he is, but he says it took him 71 years to figure out a lot of this stuff is real. So he's either 71 years old or older. And I really appreciated this story. It's like a 71-year-old man who finally has worked long enough in his life, and now he has his freedom, and he gets to be a kid again. And it just sparked my imagination, and I loved it. So thanks to the writer. I really appreciate it. All right, here's another story from Louisiana. This is from a military person who was stationed in Louisiana, and a lot of these Bigfoot encounters happen while these guys are out training, and that's what this is. Here's what he writes. I served 22 years in the Army as a military policeman and spent loads of time in the woods, which I loved as I grew up in the city. I've never told anyone about what I'm about to tell you. My unit was conducting pre-deployment training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, in the far reaches of the base in an area called Pearson Ridge. I love this area of remoteness. I was stationed there in the late 80s. We had finished training for the day and ate chow, completed all the meetings, and were settling down for the evening. I always chose to sleep outside to get away from all the snoring and farting of the 12-man sleep tent. I slept on the ground a few yards away, but this time I strung up a portable hammock, the kind that you can roll up and fit in a pocket of your field pack so I could get off the ground. A snake had crawled into my sleeping bag with me the last time I slept on the ground. There would be no more of that for me. I was settling in and I remembered I had some oranges I took from chow, so I decided to have a snack. That's when I smelled a nasty skunk. It was horrible, and I thank God that I was off the ground. It was a bright night, even though the moon was not quite full, and the sky was clear. It was a perfect night to sleep under the stars. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone walking, and I assumed it was another sergeant checking the perimeter, or someone hitting the wood line to relieve himself. Well, I didn't look up from the orange I was peeling, and I said, "Watch out, there's a nasty skunk out that way." And at the sound of my voice, the figure stopped and headed toward me, stopping about 4 feet from me, and then squatted down next to me in my hammock. I turned my head to ask what he wanted, and to my shock and horror, I was looking at a guy in a camouflage ghillie suit. It was really weird. And then I realized that was not what I was looking at, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I focused in a little better in the dark. It was a Bigfoot. Not a giant Bigfoot, but a little Bigfoot. And in my shock, I must have jumped about, causing my hammock to swing, and that caused him to jump back. He stood there focused on the hammock swinging slightly. As scared as I was, I got the sense that he wasn't threatening, but more curious, judging by the expression on his face. And yes, it was a him. I've heard they can sense your intentions, so I don't know why, but I handed him the orange that I had just peeled. I said, "If you'll go away, you can have my orange." The creature cocked his head and took the orange from my hand, and then stood up and reached out and pushed my hammock. It caused me to start swinging again. And then it began making cooing noises like a chimpanzee does when it's amused. The tree line was a few yards away, and from there came the scariest scream I've ever heard. The little Bigfoot looked in the direction of that scream, and then it looked back at me. I said, "Your mama's calling." He held up the orange as if thanking me, and then it was gone in an instant without making any noise. After a few minutes, I decided, screw this, and I almost killed myself trying to get out of my hammock, and I slept on the ground in the middle of the tent. The next morning, I went to collect my hammock and field pack only to find 3 shiny rocks piled on top of my pack. Never in a million years did I ever think I'd experience anything like this. I never once felt threatened. I was scared, yes, but not threatened. I never again slept outside like that alone, and I still have my 3 rocks I traded for an orange with the little Bigfoot. And then he goes on to say, "Contact me if you have any questions." Nope, I don't have any questions. This is quite explanatory. I know exactly what happened, and what a dadgum experience, y'all. Come on. I mean, this thing walks right up to him, squats down, and is looking at him 4 feet away. He gives him an orange. You know the story. You just heard it. But I just thought this was great. I really appreciate him sending this story. What a great experience. Appreciate you, man. Here's a short little story from Indiana. This is really good. It was sent by Shelley. In 1974, my family had an experience with Bigfoot near Marengo Caves in Indiana. I was only 4 years old then. I don't remember everything about the event, but the family has talked about it for years. We lived on a road with all our family, There were several houses lined down this road, and we were all kin. My Aunt Chloe lived alone across the road from us. Her husband had died years earlier, and at almost 90 years old, she did pretty good for herself. She was a tough old country girl who was never afraid to work. She would put in a nice garden every year all by herself. Sometimes she needed help, and my family was always there when she needed us. Late one night, we heard a gunshot from her yard. My father ran across to see what was going on. Standing on the back porch was Aunt Chloe with smoke rolling out of the shotgun barrel. "Aunt Chloe, what are you shooting at?" "It's a big hairy man was out here eating my tomatoes. I never saw so much hair on a man." We lived way out in the country, and with our area being inhabited by family, we never saw anyone out there who didn't belong or wasn't family. A stranger in one of our yards required us to see who it was. People sure didn't walk around our gardens at night picking and eating vegetables. My father looked around, and the garden had been trampled. Some of the tomato plants looked bare of fruit. Aunt Chloe wasn't lying or imagining this. Something had been there. My father and my Uncle Red told Aunt Chloe to get inside and lock the door. Then they took off in the woods behind the house looking for this man. They found a path where the man had apparently traveled. It looked like an elephant had torn a path behind Aunt Chloe's house. Limbs were broken up as high as 7 feet, but they never found the man. The night finally settled down and everyone went back to sleep, but they were on alert for a few days. The topic of discussion was about the hairy man Aunt Chloe had shot, but as far as I know, an event like this never happened again. After this, my father watched and read anything and everything to do with Bigfoot or other cryptids. I don't remember a time when he was not interested in the subject. That one event captured my father's imagination for the rest of his life. And that's how it goes. I mean, we've got a couple of stories just in this podcast where they see these things and they're consumed. This man didn't even see it. He just knew that his aunt had shot at one, and it still consumed him, and he read about it for the rest of his life. It fascinates me how these experiences really captivate people and set them on a road of almost obsession to learn and read about these things. It's amazing to me. That's one thing that I've really gathered through the 3 years that I've put these stories together, is when people get on this, when that dog gets on this trail, it won't get off of it, if you know what I mean. So thank you to the writer for sending the story. It was short, but it was really good. Really good story. Thank you, ma'am. All right, now we go from 2 stories in Louisiana all the way up to New York City. And this is one of the best stories I've read, and how honest this guy is about what this has done to his life. And it's a long story. Strap on your weaves. This is good. This is really good. I spent my teenage years growing up in the 1970s outside of New York City in the cement-covered suburbs. As teenagers, me and my buddies were fascinated with anything to do with Bigfoot. The Legend of Boggy Creek and the Leonard Nimoy Bigfoot documentaries with Patterson Film was about all we had to learn about these creatures, and most of the time we had to go to Saturday matinees to see a re-release of these films. We didn't have YouTube in those days. From everything we knew, Bigfoots inhabited the woods, mountains, and forests that stretched from Northern California to British Columbia, and that was their territory. Even Boggy Creek, a story from the swamps of Texarkana, Arkansas, was told as a weird folk tale of a 3-toed creature, and it was never identified as a Bigfoot. It was only when I started college that I would learn this was incorrect. Bigfoots live a lot closer to my New York home, something that haunts me to this day. My encounter took place in 1980, and I need to provide some background to the encounter. The group of us that grew up together were what you would call city slicker good old boys. We lived in the city, but were all born with a longing for the country and the woods. We were commuter and community college brethren. We all had CB radios in our cars with handles and everything. This was during the Burt Reynolds phase of male bonding, and it kept the group of 4 of us pretty much tight together during our college years. One of our group, Nicky, was a seasoned deer hunter and had been hunting his family's upstate property since he was 12. His parents owned a 2-bedroom hunter's cabin set on 35 acres in the Catskill Mountains, 120 miles north of New York City. We would visit Nicky's cabin on occasion when deer season had ended and get away from civilization. We had fun initiating other New York friends to nature by taking tough-talking city folk up there and seeing if we could scare them enough so the tough guys would wet their pants. One easy way that we would scare the tough guys and see what they were made of, we would hike up the mountain just behind the cabin, and on the way down, one of us at the end of the line would toss rocks sideways into the woods adjacent to the trail, giving the impression that we were being stalked by a mountain lion. We lost a lot of city slickers that way. Most would never make a return trip, and we had many laughs over this. Imagine Rocky Balboa in a leather jacket walking the woods imagining he's about to be attacked by a mountain lion and then asking to go home. You get the picture. In 1980, right after college midterms, it was just Nicky and I. We made the rounds of the local convenience stores and stocked the snowbank with some beer, cold cuts, and provisions. We lit up the Franklin stove and then had more than a few adult beverages before turning in. We each took a bedroom. I had the bedroom with the window facing the stream. I loved this room in the summer when I was lucky enough to get it. The sounds of the stream flowing came through the open window and would put me to sleep like watching golf on TV. But April was still too chilly for open windows in the Catskills. In the middle of the night, I felt myself being woken up by Nicky. He was saying that he was hearing some noise rustling on the cabin's porch. I didn't pay it any mind. I thought he was messing with me, which made him get a bit angry. When he finally had my attention, I listened, and I thought it was just raccoons. It wasn't unusual for raccoons to overlook the mothball snowbank and smell the food inside the cabin and look for a way to get in. So we clanged 2 cast iron pots together, and everything quieted down, and that was that. The next day, we woke up together and found some raccoon tracks on the porch, proving my point. We ate breakfast and practiced our shooting skills in the pasture, knocking cans and bottles off the fence, and then joking how a raccoon didn't have a chance against us. But in reality, I must say that the raccoon did have a great chance. And though we were familiar with firearms, where we lived didn't provide much opportunity for practice. It showed because at the beginning of each gun outing, I could not hit the side of a barn with a dead cat, and only improved to nicking a bottle at 20 yards with a .22 after a few hours of practice. However, a 12-gauge shotgun on improved cylinder choke could make anyone feel like Sergeant York. The rest of the day was more of the same, and we settled in for a good meal. A pan of seared chicken and pasta and wine, and one too many wild turkey shots for dessert. One thing Italian guys can do, even in the Sahara Desert, is find a way to make some good pasta. That evening, in the middle of the night, Nicky woke me again to say the raccoon had returned. I was a bit ticked this time, him being the deer hunter, suggesting he scare the raccoon off by himself or get the .22. He knows the drill. I didn't hear the pots, and then thinking about it, the rifle option would lead to an unwanted cleaning of a raccoon drill. Thankfully, I didn't hear the .22 or the port sounds, and I went back to sleep on my wild turkey. The next morning, I woke early and decided I would do one of my rituals. I would hike the trail behind the mountain alone. which I would often do in the summer to work off the pasta and the wild turkey, and then I would come back and make a mean ham and egg breakfast. This would be an apology for not helping with the raccoons. After all, it was his cabin, and I wanted to come back to this place. I grabbed my walking stick and I told half-sleeping Nicky that I was going to do my hike and that I'd be back in a while and he could make coffee but leave the breakfast to me. I headed out to the porch and I found it covered not in raccoon prints but lumps of sandy dirt. It was like someone squashed a few ant mounds on the porch. In retrospect, there weren't any signs of footprints or anything that would give me pause to investigate. There were no bear tracks, though I knew enough that any black bear mama probably would not drag her cubs onto a porch with humans. Maybe a New Jersey black bear, but not one of the Catskills. Still, I didn't see any bear or mountain lion tracks, and I had seen both in my travels to the cabin. So off I went on my hike. 30 minutes up the trail, just over a mile up the mountain behind the cabin, I noticed a pile of wood occupying the trail. This struck me since the trail was maybe 20 or 25 yards wide, and the wood debris pile looks like it was deliberately placed there. More in fact, they looked interwoven, like a nest or the way you would see a beaver dam. At this point, I looked at the stream on my right and I found it almost dry. I thought a beaver might have built a dam on the stream, and this could be a problem. If the dam were large enough and broke, it could reroute the stream directly toward the cabin below, so I slowly approached to investigate. I heard a water slapping sound like a beaver's tail on the water before diving. I was still walking uphill, and where the beaver chose to build this dam was one of the only flat areas that the stream flows, but not typically wide enough for a dam and a pond. As I climbed, I saw a tuft of fur over a mound, and then it disappeared. I climbed to investigate the level area. It was a modest dam and lodge. The pond could only have measured 100 feet long and maybe 40 feet wide, pretty small for a beaver. And even though I hadn't been there since last summer, and Nicky was there during deer season, the dam could have been there a while, but it looked like new construction. It was the only extended flat spot on this trail until you reached the mountaintop. I was excited about the prospect of seeing a beaver build his dam and lodge, so I walked quietly and was able to walk around it. I watched it for some time while not disturbing anything. Suddenly, from deep off the side of the lodge, I heard a loud branch snap. I thought the beaver was at work, and out of sight. I should let him be. After hiking further up the mountain, I visited an old abandoned cabin that I knew about, and I looked at the larger hilltop pond. It looked the same. It was 200 feet wide. I wondered why the beaver didn't build his lodge there, and then I decided to head back down. I approached the part of the trail and stream that leads to where the beaver pond was, and I began humming loudly, sounding out song words to make myself heard. I didn't want to mess with a beaver. Even though they're slower on land, I knew that they're territorial and can have a mean streak when you approach them or when they're surprised. When I was 50 yards away, my jaw dropped when I saw the outline of a black bear sniffing around the beaver lodge. I stopped and was gripping my walking stick, wishing I had the shotgun. I was worried. I stumbled on a mama black bear with some cubs nearby. So I looked around, but I didn't see any. Black bears and mountain lions are the most dangerous things in these parts, and black bears are more violent with people than grizzlies or brown bears. I did have the small pond separating me and the bear, but the bear looked strange in the shadows of the morning forest canopy. It acted uninterested in me and my noise and more interested in the dam and pond. And then it stood up, and it wasn't a bear. My mind drew a blank. I was looking at a 7-foot broad-shouldered monkey. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. I am 6'1", and the width of this thing was from my toes to my chest, about 3 feet plus. I admit that I thought for one split second that Nikki had pulled the greatest prank on me, but this was a costume no one I knew could fit inside or make, and the way the skin and muscles moved under its silky black fur, this was no costume. Whatever it was definitely a male and well over 7 feet tall. It probably weighed 500 pounds. There was only 200 feet between me and this thing, and I could make out its face. It was a cross between a gorilla and a man. Its skin was gray like a gorilla, protruding nostrils and mouth. There was a large brow ridge, and the lips were more like that of a human compared to a chimp. Well, I was half confused, since I thought Bigfoots only lived in the Pacific Northwest. They weren't 120 miles north of New York City. Well, I stared at it for an eternity, and the creature raised its arm and grabbed a tree to its side, and I watched how it wrapped its fingers around the trunk of that tree. I didn't smell anything, and then the creature began slowly swaying side to side, always gripping the tree trunk and pulling himself closer to the tree with its right hand and then pushing out. Its eyes were on me the whole time. If it wanted to come at me, it would either breach the pond or move fast to get around it, so I never moved. My only defense was my 3-foot walking stick that I was clutching like the Grim Reaper, and regretting that I didn't have my .45 or even my 12 gauge. Looking at the size of this thing, I thought my .45 would have been suicide. This thing would get to me before the bullets did their final damage. I was calm, though, and I began to sense that this thing didn't want to hurt me. It never growled or screamed. It just rocked back and forth into that one tree that it was grabbing. Suddenly, it pulled itself in one swinging twirl motion to the other side of the tree it was holding, turned its back to me, and it walked off. I slowly moved down the side of the pond, opposite the side where I spotted the animal. I couldn't see it, and I didn't hear it. I didn't want to see it again, but I had to watch for it. I know the only thought I had in my mind was to get the hell out of that place as soon as possible. Not just that trail, I had to get off that mountain and away from that cabin. I practically ran to the cabin, aided by the downhill slope. I nearly fell a few times, but I made it down in record time. When I got back, Nikki was still sleeping. I gathered my thoughts and I decided I wasn't saying anything about this, but I needed an escape plan. I cooked breakfast like nothing was wrong, but Nikki knew something was up. After breakfast, instead of shooting, I suggested we go into town and get something that I needed for dinner. We buzzed off and I went off to a payphone and I came back with a story of a sick relative in the hospital and that I needed to head back. Well, he was bummed, but he understood. We packed up and left right after lunch. I never mentioned the pond or the beaver dam. I didn't want to go back and investigate. I never said anything about what I saw, and I never went back to that cabin again. A few days after getting back, Nikki and I talked, and he apologized. He thought I wanted to get home because he was bugging me about the raccoons. A friend can always tell when a friend isn't right. We were good after that. During deer season, I would be asking Nikki for hunting stories, waiting to hopefully hear a story of a Bigfoot sighting from a hunter. There were none. Instead, I was invited to get my license and join their hunting party. No thanks. In hindsight, in researching the creature, we've had an aggressive Bigfoot living about 200 miles north of my sighting in Whitehall Mountain near Lake George. Also, the one I saw, his side-to-side moving gesture looks somewhat playful, but it's a simian act of agitation and aggression. So the Bigfoot that I saw was annoyed. He He wasn't swinging back and forth in playfulness. I think he was targeting and hunting the beaver that built the dam, and I was interfering with his hunt. I think the beaver chose that spot instead of the larger pond to avoid what was stalking him. I think the Bigfoot I saw didn't growl or scream at me because it sensed it was close to a meal of a beaver, and its sounds might have signaled other creatures. I really don't know about that. When I heard the crack to the side on my hike up the mountain and passing the dam, I think that was the Bigfoot on the side woods trying to get rid of me. Maybe he was on the cabin porch that night. I'll never know and will never tell. I will never go back to the woods alone and unarmed with anything less than a .45. On at least 3 occasions since being married, this sighting has impacted me with a PTSD-like night terror. I have had nightmares of a Bigfoot stalking either me or my wife and kids, and this may sound insane, but it's true. I would make a growling animal attack noise, screaming at the Bigfoot like an animal at the top of my lungs in a defensive posture, letting it know that I'm not choosing to flight, I'm choosing to fight, hoping that this will back the creature off. All of this was happening in my dreams, but my snarls and growls would increase in volume and grow until I would scream like a wild man, eventually scaring the crap out of my wife. And she would shake me to snap me out of the dream. She thought I was turning into a wolf man in my growling antics. The last time this happened, I woke up the entire house, my wife and our 6-year-old son and our 9-year-old daughter. We gave the kids a funny nightmare story, but my wife knows the real story. She encouraged me to share this as a form of therapy so she can sleep in peace without any wolfman dream visits. And I still live in the suburbs of the city. Only now, I'm the one who was scared by something that was actually very real. Thank you for the channel, and may God bless you for giving folks like me an anonymous outlet to get something off our minds. And thank you for the music intros. Keep playing it, brother. Oh, you got it, man. I do like that music. And I actually listen to it sometimes. But to the writer, this was a great story, and what I appreciate is his honesty. You know, I talk to a lot of guys in this Bigfoot thing, and they're real macho men. They're real, in other words, they would never admit that they couldn't hit a barn with a dead cat with a rifle or a pistol. They would never admit that. But I'm here to tell you there's a lot of these guys who shove their fingers in their suspenders and poke their chests out. They can't hit anything with a rifle. But they won't admit it because they think it makes them less of a man. This guy's honesty and how afraid he was when he saw this thing, and the admission to his wife and his kids. Well, I don't know if he's told his kids, but to all of us, that this thing still terrifies him today. So much so that he has night terrors where it's hard to wake him up from these terrors, and he's dreaming exactly about a Bigfoot chasing him or his wife and kids. I totally get it. I'm always saying I want to see one of these things, but when I read a story like this, I kind of wonder if I'm not getting a little ambitious with the things I want to see. I don't know how I would react, but I appreciate the man's honesty, and I love the story. Thank you, sir, for sending it all the way up in New York City. He lives in the suburbs of New York City. He's not necessarily in the city, but he's kind of in the city. And I appreciate those guys. Everybody I've ever met from New York City was just nice as they could be, and I really appreciate them. And I've always appreciated those people and how nice they are. They kind of get a bad rap. And I'm sure there's some jackasses up there. But everybody I've met's been real nice. And I bet this guy and I would have fun drinking beers talking about this experience. All right, I'm going to shut up. I'm getting winded talking so much. Again, this is a chapter from Codename Wild Hunt, Odin's Call. It's book 1 of a 3-book series. It's a brand new audiobook that was just released a few days ago. I wanted you guys to get kind of a flavor of what's going on in the book in case you're interested in buying it. The link will be in the description, or you can go to my website and look at all the audiobooks that I've recorded at dixiecryptid.com, or again, there'll be a link to the Audible page in the description below. Hope you guys enjoy this. Appreciate you. Second squad, Clark bellowed. Grab your shit. We're going back out. Third squad, grab yours too. You're going up on the roof to provide cover. Why are we going back out there? Asked someone from the far end of the room. Clark thought it sounded vaguely like Margolin, but he let it go. We've got a small window to get a bird in here to evac the wounded PJ, said Clark. We're going to provide cover so those things don't knock it out of the sky. If we don't get him to the hospital, it's likely he won't make it. You heard the man, bellowed Gideon. Let's move. The birds are already inbound, said Clark. We need to be ready in 10 minutes. I'll make it happen, sir, said Gideon. Thanks, Top, said Clark, heading back toward the command module. By the time Clark checked back with them, they were already in their gear and performing weapons checks. Clark took a moment to do a full function check on his weapons. Grabbing the rest of his gear, he headed for the door. I'm heading for the command module, he said. Stage by the door, and I'll join you in a few minutes. Gotcha, boss, said Gideon. Clark ducked through the door and down the hallway toward the command center. The birds are 6 minutes out, said Wilder, glancing over her shoulder toward Clark. He nodded and started putting on his armor and cold weather gear. Lieutenant Elliott was sitting beside him doing the same thing. The other teams were ready to deploy. Third squad was positioned to go out onto the roof. They were just waiting for Elliott to return, and Saunders came in with CSM Hammond. They were both wearing their gear just in case. 1 and 4 are ready to come back you up, said Saunders. Here's hoping you won't need us. It's been almost 10 minutes since we last took a hit from a rock, said Wilder. Haven't seen anything moving on camera. I think with the temperature dropping, they've headed to whatever shelter or cave they had. Anything on thermal? Asked Clark, velcroing his carrier into place. Wilder adjusted the controls and swept the area. Nothing is showing up, she said. If there was anything out there in the cold, it should show up like a beacon. Good, said Clark. Hopefully they've gone to shelter. We can't afford to count on that, though. 4 minutes, said Wilder with her hand on her headphones. I'll be at the door, said Clark. I'm heading upstairs, said Elliott. We're going to go ahead and get into position. Be careful out there, said Saunders. See you boys in a few minutes. Clark met his team at the main entrance and did a quick head count. Everyone was present except Valkyrie and Hemdall. They would be exiting onto the roof with Team 3. All right, folks, said Clark. I'll be the first man out. Take your positions and watch the trees. If you see movement, light it up. You have a go to open fire. We can't let them get into position where they can take down that chopper. Bannerman's life depends on it. Hooah! Shouted the team as one. Clark disengaged the lock and headed out the door, and instantly they were hit with the sudden cold. It was well below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind chill cut straight to the bone. Clark headed right up the middle to take a position facing the ravine that they had traveled earlier. The rest of the team fanned out and took their positions. Even the dogs were ready for a fight. Valhalla to Thunderguard, said Wilder on the radio. Go, said Clark, tucking his baklava deeper in his shirt. I have multiple contacts on thermal, she said, trying not to sound frightened. They just appeared as soon as you came out. I think they were hiding under the snow. Copy that, said Clark. Thanks for the heads up, Valhalla. Let us know what they do next, over. Copy that, said Wilder. Valhalla out. You heard the woman, shouted Gideon. They're still out there. Look sharp, hit them before they can hit that chopper. Clark could hear the incoming choppers over the wind, telling him that they were close. They were coming in at a higher altitude and dropping once they were over the mimic units. "Activate night vision," said Clark as he pulled his down over his eyes and hit the power switch. There was a slight whine as they powered up, and the world turned shades of green as the illumination changed drastically. To his left, he heard Bjorn start barking, and then Sage started barking to his left. "Contact!" shouted someone over the radio. On their left flank, Clark heard the report of one of the rifles engaging a target. It was quickly followed by others as the movement was seen on all sides. The only direction the creatures weren't approaching was from the water. "Daredevil 2-1 to Valhalla," said a voice over the radio. "Looks like you've got a party going on down there. Is it safe to approach? Over." "Who the fuck knows?" whispered Clark, bringing his rifle to bear on a target. Above him, they heard the heavy machine guns begin to chatter and bark as they sent out automatic fire with tracers every 5th round. That meant for every glowing streak they saw, there were 4 rounds in between each of them. Clark knew that had to be a hell of a lot of lead in the air. "Valhalla actual to Daredevil 2-1, said Saunders. "We are engaging tangos at this time. Negative on approach, over." "No offense, Valhalla," said Daredevil 2-1, "but we flew a long way for this party. I'm not missing the dance now. Tell your people that Daredevil 2-1 and 2-3 are coming in hot." "Crazy son of a bitch," said Clark, engaging another target. He noted that the creatures were anticipating their shots and using the larger trees for cover. Very few of the creatures had gone down during all the shooting. Above him, he heard the sound of the choppers coming in low, which was instantly followed by the miniguns on both choppers opening up and spewing death into the trees. Clark watched as trees as big around as a man began to splinter and come apart. "Run, you monkey bastards!" shouted Daredevil 2-1. Clark watched as the creatures began to run deeper into the forest, fleeing from the massive volume of fire that was being directed at them. Glancing behind him, Clark saw Daredevil 2-1 touch down on the roof of the second level without slowing his rotors. He also noted that only one wheel was on the roof. The other was hanging over open air. "They are crazy," said Clark, shaking his head. "Valhalla to Thunder God," said Wilder. "I don't see anything on thermal. If there's anyone left in the area, they're hiding under the snow. Looks like about 6 of those things are down and not moving, over." "Solid copy," said Clark. Glancing around at the team, he could tell that they were all searching for targets but not finding any. "Cease fire," shouted Clark. "Cease fire," echoed Gideon. "Cease fire," shouted Elliot above them. Clark glanced back and saw that they had finished loading Bannerman. Now the team was moving back away from the chopper. The pilot looked directly at Clark and gave him a thumbs up before climbing straight up into the night sky. "Daredevil 2-1 is clear," he said over the radio. "Now for the fun part. We try to beat the storm out of here." "Good luck, Daredevil 2-1, said Clark. In seconds, the 2 choppers were moving higher and away from the area. And once they were clear, Clark nodded at Gideon. "Everyone back inside," shouted Gideon. "Move!" Clark waited until all of the team was safely back inside before stepping back through the door and starting to shut it. But just before he did, he saw one of the creatures step out from behind a large boulder and glare at him. Clark glared directly back at it for a long moment before the creature turned and disappeared into the darkness. "We'll meet again soon," said Clark. "That's a promise." Thanks for watching this far in the video. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you. Hope you guys have had a great Thanksgiving weekend, and we'll see you on the next podcast. Thanks again.